Grammar seems to be one of those things that language learners either love or hate. But I wonder how much of it is the actual grammar and how much of it is all of that tricky terminology that goes with it.
It's so true, isn't it? People just get bamboozled with all of the grammar words. I'm Abby.
I'm Charlotte.
And you're listening to a My World of ELT podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about our own experiences of helping learners to navigate the language of grammar in addition to the language they're actually learning.
So Abby, first of all, were you a grammar lover or a hater when you studied languages yourself?
It's quite a tricky one to answer, actually, because I would definitely say that now I'm a grammar lover as an English teacher, but I think that's because I've learned a lot about it. Whereas back in the day when I was learning languages before I got into English teaching, it felt like some code that I didn't know or understand. So I would say I've become a grammar lover, but it just kind of terrified me that there was all these words and formulas and things that I felt like I should know. And I just didn't. I didn't know any of that stuff because it wasn't something we ever really learned at school. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I felt the same. It's almost like there's another language on top of the language that you're learning. There's just so much to kind of get your head around. It can be, as you said, a bit bamboozling.
Yeah. And I think it was when the teacher would walk in and go, right, today we're going to do present perfect continuous or whatever. I just spend all my time stressing about what is that? Do I know what that is? What does that look like? What's that word called again? It was a lot less about the practical use of the language and just, do I understand the code that we need to use to talk about these grammar structures? That was what almost worried me more.
Exactly. And you kind of get into that frame of mind of, what is it? How do I form it? Is that the one with the ing? Is that the one without the ing? Is it the base verb? Is it the verb three? And it sort of sets you off on the wrong foot.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think that was especially when I was at secondary school learning languages for exams and things like that, because that's what I thought we were going to be tested on was our
Yeah.
knowledge of all of those words and how they're used together. Yeah, but now I'm a convert. Now I'm definitely a grammar lover.
Me too. And as a language learner, do you remember coming across grammar terms that were really alien to you?
Yeah. So basically, I learned languages at secondary school, like a lot of people did. We had to study French and German for some time, and we took exams in those subjects. But then my other experience of language learning was actually when I was living abroad in Portugal, and I ended up kind of staying there for quite a long time. And I knew I'd have to invest in learning the language. And I wanted to do that as well. But I hadn't really had a language learning experience up to that point that was for the purpose of practical communication. It was about passing exams. So I think I thought learning Portuguese would be, right, grammar, what's this called? What's that called? And in fact, it wasn't, because it was a lot more focused on how am I going to get by on a day-to-day basis in this Portuguese-speaking country? What are the words I'm going to need to know? What are the phrases that I'm going to need to know? But what I do remember is every now and then the Portuguese teacher would say, oh, today we're going to study this grammar. And she would translate it into English. And I would think, I don't know that. I don't know what that is, even though she's translated it into English. And I now know there was a couple of reasons for that. It could be that grammar structure actually doesn't exist in English. So the name was translated, but it doesn't relate to anything that I knew in the English language. But also it was because I'd never really nailed that terminology in English. So it was a little bit like, oh, should I know this? I don't know these grammar terms in English. It's not the Portuguese that's the problem, it's the English. Have you kind of noticed that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, we've mentioned in previous podcasts that as native English speakers, we don't necessarily learn all of that terminology in our secondary school education. So a lot of the time when we go into teaching English, we don't know that language. So we have to learn it all. Whereas I think a lot of people who speak other languages as their first languages do focus on that in school. So they have that sort of broader knowledge of terminology and what things are called and what things are named.
Yeah, completely. It was very much a back to school moment when it was like, I need to know this stuff in English before I can translate it into any other language.
Yeah. And how did it make you feel?
Um, well, like I say, when we were focusing on all the functional stuff that I could see, oh yeah, tomorrow I can walk into that shop down the road and I can use this. Um, that felt really good. But whenever it was grammar based, I actually think that my Portuguese teacher had an assumption that I knew the grammar in English.
Hmm.
As I said, I didn't. So there was no reference point, and it was almost like learning two languages, like learning Portuguese, but also having to get to grips with the language of grammar, if you like, which was really unfamiliar to me. I would say what I knew was surface level stuff, nothing beyond that. So I kind of dreaded those lessons because I felt like I was expected to know more about grammar in my own language than I did. And that maybe put up a bit of a barrier between me and the Portuguese grammar learning
Yeah.
in some sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can easily happen, can't it, if there is too much focus on the terminology and what it's called, that very quickly students can become bored of the idea of grammar. Oh, grammar is just boring. It's just learning terminology, it's learning formulas, like you said, learning codes. But actually, it doesn't have to be like that.
No, no, you're absolutely right. And that was the revelation after my language learning experience, becoming a language teacher. Because of course, learning Portuguese, if I'd have done that after I'd qualified as a teacher, I probably would have approached it quite differently. But at the time, I didn't
Absolutely.
have a reference point, so yeah, it was all quite intimidating.
Sounds like a an interesting learning journey you've been on.
Yeah, I wish I could go back though. When you look back and you think, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have worried so much about this. I'd have focused more on that. But yeah, definitely a learning curve. So, Charlotte, if we think about materials a little bit, what do you think about the way that course books focus on grammar?
I mean, I have some mixed feelings on it. I think a lot of the time, course books will focus on exercises, things that are right or wrong, true or false, and it's not necessarily related to how you're going to use that grammar in the real world.
True.
So those sorts of exercises are not really all that helpful. But I like activities and materials that are more based on real life situations, maybe a bit of task-based learning where it's actually using the grammar. As you were saying, in Portuguese, you didn't really need to know what it was called. You didn't want to know what it was called. You just wanted to know how to use it. So I think I'll always go towards activities that are based on real life situations rather than those grammar book activities that can just be a bit like right or wrong. Oh, you got 7 out of 10. You got 5 out of 10. Oh, you can't form this properly. I'd focus on the real life usage.
Some of those grammar books are really random as well, aren't they? Like the examples that they
Mm,
include, where you might have a task that's practicing a particular language point, like past continuous, and all of the sentences are just really, they're not connected. It's all disjointed. They're completely
yeah,
random concepts that are not at all connected to anything,
absolutely.
which always just, yeah, just seems a bit strange to me.
And sometimes then your students are focused on the meaning of it because it's an example that's completely out of context rather than actually focusing on the grammar and how it's used and how it can be used. It's kind of like, what does this even mean? Why are we talking about this now? You know, a minute ago we
Yeah.
were talking about going to London and now we're talking about taking the dog for a walk, you know. So yeah,
Yeah.
those sorts of examples that are completely out of context, I think can hinder learners as well.
Yeah, catches you off guard, doesn't it? Trying to
Yeah.
make sense of it all. So, what are some of your go-to materials that then aren't overly complicated in terms of focusing on grammar terminology, I guess?
Well, actually, I spent a lot of time working in a school where they didn't have a course book, which was actually great for my development in terms of creating activities and creating materials, because the point of that sort of approach was to think about your learners. Who have you got in your class? What do they know? What don't they know? What do they need? What do they need to focus on, rather than just thinking, right, today we're doing page 17 of a course book. It's kind of like, right, well, today we are focusing on a grammar point from the syllabus, but what can I design and what can I do to really help my learners progress with that grammar? So I've always focused on activities, like I mentioned before, that are perhaps based on more real world usage rather than the let's see if we can form it correctly,
Yeah.
true, false kind of questions. What
Yeah.
about you?
No, I can really relate to that. And you say about knowing your learners, and I think, there are no two classes the same. And I remember teaching a class of students that were really hot on terminology because in their educational system, they they'd been taught those words. That was an important part of their education. So you could ask them what a past participle was, and they all knew, in which case I wouldn't feel so bad about using all of that language because they understood it and it was relatable to them.
Sure.
But then another class teaching exactly the same language point, they might never have come across any of these grammar terms before, and that's just not going to work because you don't want to spend all your time teaching them what those terms mean at the expense of the language that they're trying to learn.
Yeah.
So I think creating materials and being responsive to the students in front of you kind of manages that problem, I guess. And so as an approach, I guess, how do you deal with your planning your lessons to make sure that grammar is accessible to your learners?
Well, I guess for me, the starting point will always be teaching grammar in a context rather than just those isolated examples or isolated sentences, like we mentioned before. I think that's really important. I think it takes away the need for so much terminology because the focus has shifted. So I think it makes it more accessible, it makes it more enjoyable, and it kind of takes the pressure off of what is this called? How is it formed? And again, focuses on how your students will use that language when they're outside of the classroom. Much like yourself in Portugal, you want to know how to go and buy something from the shop, rather than perfecting the meta language.
Yeah. And I suppose sometimes that approach can mean that students aren't really aware that they're studying grammar and in a good way because then
Mm,
they don't have these preconceived ideas and they're not starting to tell themselves, oh, grammar, no, I can't do that. I've never been good at that.
absolutely.
So, grammar in disguise.
So, Abby, as a teacher trainer, how do you encourage your trainees to approach grammar teaching so as not to overwhelm the learners?
I think it's drawing on all of the experience that we were talking about before. And I think when we work with trainees who are, they've come to this wanting to become English language teachers, they've got an idea in their head of what an English language teacher is and what they do. I think they assume that a big part of it is grammar teaching, very explicit grammar teaching. And often asking trainee teachers about the function of language is something they're really, really not used to thinking about. When you say, yes, okay, you're right, this is the present perfect, but what does it mean? When do we use
Mm.
it? Why do we use it? That idea of the function of language is quite alien to a lot of them. So, my thinking really is let's show them there's another way. You don't have to stand up there and talk in this grammatical code. Um, get to the heart of why we're doing this. What does it mean? Start there. Start with the meaning, and the rest of it will either come or maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe we don't need to use all of that complicated terminology. So there's a lot of, trying to get that shift in mindset. Let's forget about all of that real teacher centered explaining grammar.
Mm.
Let's just try to kind of focus on what's it all for.
Oh, that's really great advice. And I've heard you talk about reverse teaching before. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of other terms for this. I guess, some people might call it guided discovery kind of approach, but it's almost getting students to notice, put the grammar in there, give them a text, give them a listening, have a conversation about something, tell them a story where the grammar is in there, and don't start with it. Start with the whole.
Mm.
Start with, right, what do we think about this story? Did you like it? Which was your favourite bit? What do you think of the ending? How would you change the ending? And then get them to notice, oh, can you notice something here that repeats quite a few times that looks like this? Can you find any examples of that? Great. What does that mean? Why is it being used? And then it's almost right at the end that you can kind of say, that was the present perfect continuous. um, but it's not starting there. I think starting with that can
Hmm.
put people off, panic them. Um, so, yeah, it's almost, again, like I say, focusing on the meaning and the function of the language, noticing patterns, noticing, what looks the same, what's being used in paragraph one, what's being used in paragraph two, how are they different, why are they different? Um, and then it's really kind of showing students that if they've got curiosity about language and they've got good observation skills, there's a lot they can work out for themselves and they don't need to worry too much about having a good command of all of that grammar terminology.
If you would like to find out more about reverse teaching to make the language of grammar easier for our learners, subscribe to the My World of ELT website and head to our teaching community for a free download about it. You'll also find lots of other free downloads and access to live events there.
And did you know that we also have a language module on this topic? Go to our website to check out our bite-sized language modules, focusing on practical classroom phrases and teaching tips on a range of topics.
Thanks for listening to this My World of ELT podcast, and see you next time.